I recently came across this story in from Vancouver, British Columbia, where a goose had been seen for about 7 months with an arrow stuck in the back part of its body. So recently, authorities managed to capture the goose. They removed the arrow. Hunters get blamed for this. Hunters even criticize each other, saying if you can't properly shoot an animal in a humane, ethical way, you shouldn't be hunting at all. Other people and groups and organizations and stuff will use this as an opportunity to say, hey, here's another reason why hunting is so inhumane and so cruel. But I dug into this story in Vancouver, and like a lot of these stories that I've seen, the animal was shot with an arrow equipped with a field tip. So if you don't know a lot about archery, or even if you don't hunt, so this is a field tip. It's what hunters put on their practice arrows. They're designed to be able to go into foam or straw targets, and they can be easily pulled out. These field tips are never used for hunting because they don't create the tissue damage, the wound channels, the breaching of the thoracic cavity, and the bleeding that leads to a quick, humane kill like a hunting broadhead does. So this is a hunting broadhead. It gets its name from the fact that it's broad and it's incredibly sharp. This is what causes the bleeding and the internal damage that leads to quick, humane kills in hunting. Hunters know this. So these animals in these urban environments, these park settings that have arrows in it with the field tips, I can't prove this, but I suspect, and I'm willing to put money on it, that more often than not, these animals are not being shot by hunters. They're being shot by people who don't hunt but can buy a bow or a crossbow at their local hardware store. They don't need a license for it. And they're sick and tired of these animals in their yards, in their gardens. And so they take matters into their own hands. Often, when I see stories about deer with arrows tipped with field points, or crossbow bolts, which is the arrow for a crossbow with a field tip, these animals often have these arrows in their head, in their neck, in such a way and angles that it was never lethal to the animal. It's just walking around with this arrow underneath the hide, between the hide and the bone. Hunters know, bow hunters know, that shooting an animal in the head with an arrow is simply not going to lead to a quick, humane kill. Shots are always placed in the lungs or the heart when a hunter is hunting one of these animals. I feel this is really important to bring this up because if we look to South Australia, last year this exact thing was happening. These pictures of wildlife having field tipped arrows stuck in them in non-fatal ways. These pictures were getting into the media and they were being sent to politicians. They brought in a bow hunting ban in South Australia. And again, I don't know for sure. I don't have the evidence, but I'm willing to put money on it that even in South Australia, these animals were probably being shot with archery equipment from people who were not trained hunters. And even though hunters were pointing this out, that these animals had target practice arrows in them, that it couldn't possibly be hunters that were doing this, the politicians didn't listen and the bow hunting ban was brought in. One of the things that this story highlights is I believe even the average person that doesn't hunt has a tolerance threshold for wildlife. When they're getting into their house, their garbage, their homes, their gardens, causing damage, chasing their kids around, or threatening their pets, there's a tipping point where people just lose their tolerance for wildlife. And the unfortunate part when this happens, and it's avoidable, the unfortunate part is people are driven to the point of taking matters into their own hands. So we see things like the improper use of bow hunting equipment and field tip arrows, poisons, improper use of traps, all sorts of devices and ways that just causes injury to wildlife and not legally or ethically killing them. And this is where trained hunters can play a beneficial role in the urban areas of our communities, municipalities, regional districts, by coming in and managing these wildlife that people have become intolerant of. The trained hunters can ethically dispatch these animals and make use of it and prevent the inhumane treatment of wildlife when a citizen gets frustrated and takes matters into their own hands. So the message I want to get across here is, if you see stories like this in your community, it's really important to get control of this narrative early. Write a letter to your local newspaper and explain all of these things about field tips and hunting and broadheads and how hunters are trained and they know where to place the arrows, and point out that it might not be fair to be pointing the criticism at legal hunting and at hunters in the community. Write a letter, send an email to your elected officials. Just try to nip these narratives in the bud that develop around these urban animals with arrows stuck in them. We need to ban hunting. We need to ban trapping. We need to ban bow hunting. Stick to the facts and educate people about how hunters hunt, the types of arrows that they use. Point out, if it is true, that these animals are not being shot with legal broadhead hunting arrows. If you don't feel comfortable doing this or writing a letter or reaching out to your elected officials, get a hold of me and I'll help you put something together. But if hunters are not the ones that are unethically shooting these animals with non-hunting, non-lethal hunting arrows, then we need to point that out to our communities, to our elected officials, and stand up for hunting and show the community how trained hunters could actually avert these sorts of things from happening.